So God put them in a position where they had to depend on them, so they would know that the wealth that they got was from Him. So the wilderness is a season of training. So we get trained in a season of lack. So we get trained in the season when we are without. We learn to trust God in the wilderness. So we sometimes need to see miracles of God in order for us to give God the credit. So you need to be in a situation where, in a position where you can't get yourself out, and you know it was God that did it. So we can learn trust by doing without. So surviving on daily manna grooms our heart. So it's grooming our heart to build our character. So, but once you develop faith and humility, you don't need to stay in that situation. You don't need to stay in that state of poverty. So I know I had to be laid off 3 times for me to finally realize that my work wasn't my source. And so I didn't depend on my job as my source. You know, finally at the 3rd time. And at the 3rd time, God actually told me to stop looking for work. And so I had to completely trust Him. And so it was in the wilderness that I developed trust, and I realized that depending on God for so it's like, okay, whatever happens at work, but that's not my security.
You can't bomb there either.
Right,
It's not a place to camp out. That's good.
Right.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about the golden calf. So God blessed the Israelites with wealth when they left Egypt. So He gave them favor, we saw in the eyes of the Egyptians. So He gave them favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they asked the Egyptians to give them their stuff before they left. And the Egyptians gave them gold and cattle and livestock. They gave them, so they left Egypt wealthy as slaves. So it's due to the favor of God, they left Egypt wealthy. But they used the gold to build a golden calf. So they had all of this gold, and they built a huge statue and worshipped it instead of God. So the blessing God gives you have the ability they could either change the face of history, or they could become a golden calf. So if immaturity will turn a blessing into a golden calf. So God will bless you with something, but instead of using it to glorify God, you can use it can draw you away from God and have you worshiping something else. So if it comes from your own labor, then you're going to take credit for it. But if I believe that it came from God, then I'll give God credit for it. And it'll strengthen my faith. But the wilderness wasn't the destination where God wanted them to go to. The wilderness was the training ground that they had to go through to get to the promised land. So when we can trust God in the pit or in the prison or in the wilderness, then we're ready for the promised land or the palace. So the wilderness isn't the destination. The miracles in the wilderness used to sustain them, to keep them alive. But the miracles they got in the promised land were to advance them. So once they got through the wilderness, they didn't need miracles to keep them alive. They got miracles to advance them even further. So in conclusion, some people think the path to contentment is having more. We think that I wouldn't covet if I just had more. If God would give me that car, that house, that job, that spouse, that child, that blouse, then I'll be content.
Might be all right. Give me a couple of days with that.
But there's some people think, oh, if I had less, if you need to have less, then you would be content. You need to, there was a minimalistic living is the key to there was the monastic movement, the monks, where they would just seclude themselves. They would just work, eat, sleep, and pray. And they would, live together just meagerly and just pray to God. And people say, okay, that's what, and they must be, and they're happy. But one guy, I think Martin Luther, he was a monk, and he said he was there, and they were praying, and they were eating, and they had spaghetti, and he had 2 meatballs, but he said he saw the guy next to him had 4 meatballs, and he's like, why don't I have 4 meatballs? He said, that monk is really skinny, and I need 4 meatballs. So it doesn't matter how little you have, you can still covet. So it's not found in discipline. It's not found in trying harder. Money won't bring you contentment, and poverty won't bring you contentment. So we sometimes find our identity or our self-worth from our status or from our material things. So Jesus is the only one in whom we should find our identity. So coveting comes from being dissatisfied with Jesus. So you'll be content if you're satisfied with Jesus. The more of heaven that's in you, the less of the world will satisfy you.
Excellent.
When we're separated from God, the blessings will make us prideful and push God further. It'll push us further from God. If we get blessings and we're separated from God, then we'll become prideful.
Those are good points.
And when we're separated from God, the blessings will make us prideful and push us further from God. But when God is in our presence, we won't misuse the blessings that he gives us. When we're face to face with God, his blessings will draw us closer to him. So if you view your blessings as a gift from God, it'll draw you closer to God. And it can also draw those who see him blessing you closer to him as well. So if people know that you're following God and that God is blessing you, then they may want some part of that God you have.
Or that favor, yeah.
So prosperity and riches don't have to turn you from God. So you have to be truly thankful for every penny, truly thankful to God for every new convert. So whatever the prosperity is, truly thankful from God for every step that the child takes, truly thankful for God for every piece of property, truly thankful for God for every compliment that you get. So we have to focus on the fact that we don't deserve it, but without feeling guilty because God decided to give it to us.